Excited to welcome Charlotte Hornets assistant coach Nick Friedman to the basketball podcast. Friedman also currently serves as the associate head coach of the Haitian senior men's national team. He received a promotion to assistant coach after spending the last 2 seasons with the Hornets as a player development coach, where he served a hybrid role with both the Hornets and the Greensboro Swarm's coaching staff. He previously worked for 3 years as a coach in the G League with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers, Maine Red Claws, and Northern Arizona Suns. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to be here. Big fan of what you do, and to be included as a guest on this platform is nothing short of an honor, man. A lot of great basketball minds that you've been able to interview, and I'm excited just to talk hoops.
Me too. And, we've already got a taste of it. We talked privately a little bit, and I'm just so excited to share so many of those conversations with so many people. And, Nick, let's start with something that's a bit of a passion project for you, and that's the mindset of the role player. And particularly, I love the phrasing around ego adjustment. Just great phrasing. So can you talk a little bit about why this is a passion for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle for the majority of these guys coming into the NBA is they've been alpha males pretty much their entire lives. And when you're that guy and you've been relied upon to be that guy your entire career, you're walking into a situation where all 17 guys on your roster, including your two ways, are very good players. In order to crack that top 8 consistently, as an incoming rookie, obviously I don't have an exact number, but it's fair to say pretty much 95, 90%, 97% of these dudes have to do the sacrificial things very well in order to ultimately develop into the creative handlers and playmakers and high volume scorers that they feel as if they are right now. And it's my job to help them, accelerate that learning curve by adopting those habits as quickly as possible in order to get the minutes that they need to prove themselves. I mean, it's really been, my passion as a coach since, I got into the G League in 2015 and being there with every step of the way with, guys like Gary Payton, Daniel House, PJ Dozier, here in Charlotte with Jalen McDaniels, Caleb Martin, Cody Martin, and just seeing their growth. And when those guys really figure it out and find themselves in rotation, it's a proud moment. And it's very encouraging when you see guys accept the mindset and adopt the mindset.
So even more than the talent, it's getting them to understand the mindset of being a role player and accepting that, but also getting them to be able to see that as a role player, they can have a long, lucrative career. And that's got to be part of the mindset, isn't it?
100%. Everybody considers the term role player in a way, not everybody, of course, but it's a death sentence, right? Like it's a hit to the heart, a hit to the soul of like you may be speaking, down about my game, when in reality it's just accepting the corner running, the spatial awareness, the offensive rebounding, the being into the ball consistently on the defensive end, just doing those things so you buy more trust from your head coach. When you accept that as it not being a threat to your ego or your game, you grow. You look at guys like Jeremy Grant, who for years were living in that world, and then boom, you break through and you find yourself in a position in Detroit where you're now a high volume handler and scorer, and you're able to get those reps and living in that role that you've envisioned yourself being in since the day you started hooping.
How do you get them beyond saying that exact point where, I just haven't had the right opportunity versus this is the reality I should, be in the present in?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the concept of emulation, which I've been very big on. I think a lot of these guys, the ones that make it, don't have a problem with watching others who have succeeded doing the exact same thing. And that's what I've been impressed with. The list of guys that I named earlier, they all have a willingness to at least learn and watch and say, you know what, I can take these steps in a similar fashion. And it's not, like I said, a threat to my ego. And that's really the key, I think, is just the emulation piece and showing them, very concrete examples of guys doing those things at a very high level.
So, and again, more of a curious question. You're not just showing them comparables in terms of skills and talent on the floor. Are you showing them comparables in terms of future contracts and possibilities and long-term career success?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the common denominator with guys who have gotten paid in those roles is that they win. And in order to win, you have to accept that sacrificial mentality. So, those clips may include just a sequence of a guy, making a high level play in the offensive end where he may not touch it. He just may space the floor appropriately, sprint back in transition defense, dominate that defensive possession, go back and bang a corner three, and it's like just watching the flow of the game. It's not necessarily just a single moment or clip. You show maybe it's a snap drive where it's no indecision and playing off the catch. Of course, you have those moments, but like the general theme of how you play and showing it to those guys and them understanding, what, it may not show up in the box score, but us as evaluators, we value that at the highest level.
I want to highlight that because that's something I share with a lot of clients too, is this concept, because I never saw anything more impressive than when an NBA coach, and I got to sit in on a film session, spent about 10 minutes on clips of rim rollers not getting the ball and pointing out their value to the play. And that was the whole film session, was just dedicated to that. And can you give us some other examples of those type of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big one is just the consistency of, what we call here in Charlotte through the moon. Just are you relentlessly attacking the offensive glass? Are you making your presence felt there? And then does that translate to getting back on the defensive end in transition? For us here this year, we struggled in transition, and, being able to show like high level moments of that happening in the playoffs to our young guys is a small thing that can buy you, saving 4 to 6 points on the defensive end. So I think that right there in and of itself is a great example. And then just the ultimate, willingness to make the right read at the rim, whether it results in a assist in the box score or a hockey assist that doesn't necessarily exist on paper per se. But I think those are two high level examples of things that we need to preach on a daily basis that our guys, off the rip won't necessarily acknowledge.
And I imagine it's important to do those video sessions and acknowledge those things, not just for the role player, but for the star to see those things as well and to see the value of these players for them, right?
Yeah, 100%. And, you watch these playoff games and these guys are all doing it. And if they don't do it, you see a level of self-correction. A guy I've just been so unbelievably impressed by is Jason Tatum. Having been in Boston in 2018 when I was with the Maine Red Claws and seeing his growing pains in those areas and it really, really showing up at the highest level in the playoffs. I think, I said this the other day, but there's not one young hooper in the world that shouldn't be watching that guy and really taking in the little things that he's doing to dominate the game and putting the Celtics in a position to potentially win the NBA chip.
Yeah. And I know we can't take you far from your roots, which is player development. And one thing about player development, and I'm curious about your perspective on it, is developing passing and the elements of passing, because it's such an important part of the modern game. We can all reflect on, say, that hook pass to the weak side. We called it a Ginobili, different things like that. So can you talk a little bit about, in the player development perspective, developing passing?
Yeah, I was talking about this with a coach, Cody Toppert, who's a mentor of mine, the other day. And it's just like normalizing the skill of passing, right? Like the majority of individual workouts in the summer, I mean, how many passes are you throwing on average? And it's just like the consistent theme of like me, as opposed to like, why isn't a power Euro spray to the corner an appealing thing? It's considered skill by the coach, but I don't know if it's necessarily acknowledged as skill by the player. And when you're able to incorporate it at a high level and showing it happen and translate to a game for a player, it starts to be considered a skill. And ultimately, that's been a huge goal of mine, is to help these guys accept playmaking as a highly valued skill. So for us, as an example, like just counting the number of passes I had in a workout with one of our guys the other day, we made 61 game reads. Whether it's I'm snap driving, I'm reading the rim, whether it's a early advanced pass off the nail, I'm playing pass and chase, I see a rescreen, and now I have to read whether or not to hit the pocket, hit the wing, or skip it to the corner. And it's just the reps on reps, just like shooting, just like finishing, that, we as coaches, I don't necessarily think we consistently involve it enough. And that's been a big staple of mine, is how much we can create balanced players through the workouts that we're implementing.
Well, I love that you're sharing this, because again, I've been in many Division I programs and many NBA practices and stuff. And what you never see is players passing, because again, a lot of the coaches still, well, the players don't pass. Well, if the coaches are getting all the passing reps, then your players aren't developing an important part of the skill, right? And there has to be a balance for that. And really putting players in situations where they have to pass, like you just talked about. You're doing that because there's guided defense or there's coaches playing defense. Is that how that's happening?
Yeah. It's, we're fortunate enough here, right, to have a pretty large video room, pretty large player development staff where we can manipulate situations, put bodies in there, make guys see tags, and that's obviously helpful. But there are workouts where you have limited bodies where you can still work on the fluidity of a hook pass, the fluidity of a pocket pass, and it may not necessarily show up right away, but it's just like the habit of making the pass. It's like watering the plants with your form shoot, with your form shooting, your spot shooting, like you still need to incorporate it. I think there's been this narrative for years that it's very hard to develop feel. And I could not disagree with that more. Of course, you're going to have guys that are just unbelievably gifted natural playmakers, and it's in their blood, and they can just see things that you can't teach. But there are guys that you can work with to help them read the rim better and, improve their assist numbers from 1 to 2 a game. And that's a massive difference, just one more assist.
Well, I would argue it's impossible to develop feel if you're doing on-air drills 1-on-0 all the time. And I think that's where some people come from, is that their players never actually have to make decisions, so they don't develop feel. And then to your point, they never have to make passes either. And that's a huge problem, isn't it?
Huge problem. And, we as coaches were always forcing the idea of selflessness and showing it via film in a team setting. But if all your workouts are based essentially on just your own individual skill of scoring the ball, you're not necessarily working on the mindset of making the right read. So, it's definitely something that has to be worked on every day. Simple way that I've always incorporated is making 2 passes before you shoot 5 spot shots. And it's like, say I'm coming off a DHO, maybe you're not even having anybody guard him, but you're coming off a DHO, make the pocket pass. I'm rolling. I roll, I flip it right back to you. You re-space out for a step up, come off the step up, pocket pass. Now you're relocating to the corner, then you get your 10 reps. And it's just a high volume way to throw 2 passes while getting high volume shots up.
So I love this. And BDT shooting, whether you're familiar with it or not, is basically the active participation of both players. But one player in particular is the passer and cueing decisions for their teammate with task representative decisions. And I've had coaches tell me that their players would never be the passer in that. And that's why they would never do that. And I've just said to them, well, then you're missing opportunities to connect skills and decisions in a really meaningful way for both players. And it just, again, it surprises me, but it encourages me hearing you talk about this.
At the NBA level, you always respect the individual space of guys need to get their own individual work in. And I think we get unnecessarily scared off by doing group work and making these guys just develop feel and playing together, throwing swing passes, throwing early, what we call Montana reads before the paint to each other, and just getting that feel of just natural, simple playmaking. Like, it's a small added element, but if you continuously work on it together, like, you'll see it come up and pick up, and then now guys are vibing at a far higher level than if, all their workouts and individual skill is just by themselves.
If you can go, where does the word Montana reads come from? And give us a little more detail on that.
That's a Chad Iskey term.
Okay.
Shout out Chad Iskey. It's just we talk about touching the paint, relentless paint touches, but one way to get there is just passing before the paint. And that was a big key for us was, we were able to get to the nail at a high level. We were top 3 in the league in paint touches, but the majority of the reason as to why we were successful in touching the paint in high volume was because we were just willing to get off of it early. We could have done a better job of it, of course. Like, we were not necessarily perfect, but I think our guys adopted the mindset of making that early advance pass, making that early swing pass, and then ultimately get to the action that helps us touch the paint. So that's for us as a Montana read. It's just the early nail kick.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned top 3 in the league in paint touches. And another thing that was really valuable and important for you guys is hitting the pocket. Can you talk about that in terms of pocket passes to the roller?
Through the first half of the season, we actually didn't hit it as much as we should have. And then, I think one thing that Coach Borrego has done an unbelievable job of in Charlotte is just having those conversations with players of what do you see? And Mason Plumlee, who is a very high-level playmaker in the pocket and just high-level playmaker in general, kind of brought up the idea of like, coach, like, find me in the pocket, I'll make plays. And we started to trust it more by hitting him, hitting PJ, obviously hitting Trez once we added him. And it just added another layer of versatility to our offense, especially against teams that are just dropped. You're playing against Valanciunas, you're playing against Vucevic. Like, you have to take advantage of hitting the early pocket pass to then, help making these teams respect tags. And we started doing that in very high volume as the year went on, and it really, really helped our offense.
I don't know the percentages, but just intuitively from watching games, I assume is drop coverage the dominant ball screen coverage now in the NBA?
I got to do a better job of knowing the exact percentages myself, but that's one thing that even in workouts, like, I need to do a better job of, is that I do simulate a lot of drop coverages, and naturally teams, you're not seeing it as much. You're seeing a little bit more like teams looking to blitz. Obviously, reds are huge switches. That's our terminology for switching. But just, you're going to see it in decent volume, but you're looking at teams doing a lot more, being up at the level and aggressive and reading 1 through 5.
Yeah, very interesting. And I would have said switching was probably the other one in terms of seeing that a lot too. Something else that I want to get your opinion on is zooms.
So for us, a zoom is just passing and chasing. So you're hitting your big man. You can play it with your 3s and 4s if you're playing 4 out, 1 in, but just not waiting on pick and rolls and playing a little bit of get game, pass and chase game, and then making decisions from there. And it's just that level of, hey, is my big going to keep it? Is he going to give it back? And just, let them hoop from there. It's just the unpredictability of splits, not necessarily your traditional delay splits where you're hitting the 5 and now you're going into low angle splits, but more just so the randomness of, I'm hitting my 5 and now I'm sprinting over the top and cutting to the rim. I'm sprinting over the top and playing random splits on the weak side. And we started to really do a good job of just allowing our players to direct themselves and playing out of those actions. And it just added a whole nother level of unpredictability to our offense.
And a big part of that is what we're seeing is not giving it to the cutter, right? And then letting that cutter curl the gap and go to the rim and put pressure on the rim. And that leads to secondary options. What are some of the preferred secondary options off of that when you don't give it to the cutter?
I love the low split on the opposite, on the weak side, the low split or the high split on the weak side, and, tight curling, go cutting, which is just a straight basket cut by the guy who initiated the zoom, your ears, just back doors, and playing off of that. But I love the weak side splits, whether it's high or low, and manipulating that and just, letting your guys go to work. I'm the biggest believer in player direction. You look at the breakdown of your flow offense, right? After miss possessions that you necessarily can't control all the time. There's about 60 of them. 18 of those are going to be transition, right? So now you're looking at 40 true half court flow possessions where you have to let your guys play. Now, there has to be that structured freedom, right? Of they're playing within your triggers. But the more that your triggers can be owned by your players, that's great offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's great offense for sure, and fun to watch. And you talked about the best offenses are player directed. Can you give us some other examples of where player directed comes into play in your offense?
Yeah, it's just the recognition of what trigger we're in, and that was a huge point of emphasis in terms of player development for our point guards like Melo and Terry. Is just can you orchestrate the trigger on your own? Are you going to wait on coach to call one, or you're going to understand and recognize what the spacing is looking like, whether it's 5 out or 4 out, and hoop from there. So I think the overall mentality is a big aspect of being able to teach it and helping your guys, own that concept of player direction.
Did you find that initially, like, there was a little bit of structure to that in terms of, say, coach call, but then gradually it became more free and less necessary for the coach to call? Or from the beginning, did you just open it up and give the freedom to the players?
Yeah, it's a progression.
Yeah.
I think we had a pretty good balance of it. And, through our first 5 games, we were pretty prolific offensively. And then you find it getting a little ugly and you feel like you have to reel it in. But that's where you can't take your foot off the gas pedal and you got to accept those growing pains. If you want to play organized, high-paced basketball, it's not going to look pretty every step of the way. You're going to have to teach it. You're going to have to accept that flawed aspect, that ugly aspect of it. But when it fully comes together and guys start to own the system, that's when it's really beautiful.
Alex Sarama with the BDT offense talks about neutral as the key that kind of triggers flowing into something conceptual from there. Is that the similar thing when the defense recovers and it's neutral and there's no advantage to be able to, again, keep attacking and kicking or dominoes or different things like that? Is that when you flow into conceptual?
Yeah, for sure. Like the play after the play mentality of like when it all breaks down, whether I'm starting 5 out, we play off of a drag, and that first option of hitting a pocket, hitting a shake up, or now getting off it early off the nail, no advantage is created. What are we doing? And that's another huge element of playing high-paced flow basketball is what's your strategy when it dies, right? Are you bringing your 5 up? Are you keeping them low and now playing, bringing your smalls into pick and rolls and slipping out or rolling and playing off that way? But like really committing to an identity of play after the play is huge to then making sure that your flow offense is productive when those triggers don't work.
So in saying that, I'm curious, are you seeing anything different evolve, say, last 8 seconds of the shot clock, last 5 seconds of the shot clock, other than high ball screen? Like we're seeing some more variable stuff, aren't we?
Yeah, much more, especially against teams that are switching 1 through 5, isn't an advantage to bring your 5 back up if he hasn't been able to seal and get a touch deep against a small. Do you want to keep them lower? Do you want to bring in a small who's spaced in the corner on the wing into another pick and roll? Because one thing that's really hard to guard is when, say you've got your 1 up top with a 5 switched onto him, bringing a small into that mismatch to screen and slip out. And then now the 5 has to guard that slip out in a closeout situation. That's tough. And it's hard to get players to adopt that mindset because when they see a 5, it's naturally like, let me just space 4 out, 1 in and go to work. But, you're seeing these elite switch guys that advantage doesn't work. And teams are so good at loading up to the ball that, it's, hey, maybe let me use another screen to get an advantage downhill, or now I'm throwing back to play off of that mismatch.
You've seen a lot more pre-switching too, which is an evolution of switching and trying to get, not let a team hunt your matchups. So have you seen any good counters, or have you had any good counters to kind of pre-switching and attacking that?
Yeah, I just think it's just the pace at which you're going to go. The quicker, if you are going to bring your smalls up, the quicker that you can identify it and not let the play die and then get stagnant and say, you know what, I want him to come into this action, as opposed to like, let's recognize our concept right away and play off of theirs. I think the number one counter, you have to ride that fine line of not making things overly complex. And I think there's a number of things that you can do, but the simpler, the better.
Another thing you've done a lot in Charlotte is screening with the guards. So can you talk about using guards as screeners?
That play after the play concept is huge in terms of evolving them as screeners, and then you got your 4 out, 1 in. You've got your high level playmakers on the wing, whether it's your Miles Bridges or your PJ Washington. How do you involve them as handlers? And that's when you can start playing, instead of playing pass and chase and you're coming back off of it, now you're throwing it or zooming it with a PJ Washington. You're going to screen for him. You see Denver's done it for a number of years, but that was an action that we got really, really good at, is just recognizing. I think we could have done it more in the flow as opposed to as a play call, and that's when it's really deadly. But that concept of day one, how do you get your smalls to accept screening as a high-value skill set? For a guy like Terry Rozier, he's upwards like 1.3, 1.4 points per possession as a screener. That's elite. And being able to, more than 5 times a game involve in that action in the flow of play is when it's really, really successful.
Like, are most of the time those leading to then ISO situations in terms of you're getting a matchup onto, say, Terry Rozier and then snapping back to him and letting him attack that matchup? You
get a lot of throwback, more so throwback threes. Like, okay, those are the ones that you get. And then with a guy like, Miles Bridges, you're just turning the corner and getting downhill. Like it's just like the non-stagnant advantages. Now, if you other teams that do a great job of scouting, NBA is tough. It's like if you commit to something game after game after game and don't tweak, these coaches are so good, these players are so smart that you have to add small elements of tweaking those concepts, those actions, or maybe it's like you go away from it from a game, or maybe go away from it for, a 3 out just so it's not in your scout, but just getting creative with how you're getting to those slip outs. If it's really part of your identity is huge.
It strikes me as, periodization is so important in terms of, physical development of a player over a season. And it strikes me a little bit in terms of some of this play calling you just alluded to is periodization of that as well, that you can't run the same thing every game. And it's almost like you have to have this periodized schedule so that these things exist, but you can't run them all the time or they get used to defending it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And that's why the player direction aspect of it is so critical, because
so that they become more random and variable in terms of how they have happened.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Are they recognizing on demand of how to play out of a drag and a 5 out versus a 4 out situation on their own? Are they able to find these slip out actions in both alignments on their own? Like I said, when you get to that point, that's when it's far less predictable and you don't have to be so overly concerned as a coach of like, I got to control the game. Of course, it gets to that point of like, now you got your 20 to 30 dead ball possessions where you can really control it and manipulate it and say, hey, you know what? This team is terrible at guarding the pocket. How are we going to put them in actions as much as possible to make sure that we're playing out of those actions?
So these guard-to-guard screens, obviously ghosting is an option, but let's say they're going to set the screen. Are you talking inside hip? You talking high hip? Where are you talking in terms of getting the screen to be able to force the reaction you want?
The lower third. So, the way I break it down is you got your upper third, which is probably like the high quad, front of your quad. Then you got your middle third, which is like directly, in line. And then the lower third, which is, pretty much like, your glutes, and just like making slight contact there and forcing the indecision of like, can I really switch on the underside here and take away the advantage? So, for us, it's big on talking about the upper, middle, and lower third, but lower third is where you want to hit.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. And you already alluded to this, early offense appreciation. You love early offense. And I know one of the things that you looked at was kind of evaluating rim runners. And what were some of the conclusions from that evaluation of rim running?
When I first started my journey through the NBA, I was all the way 5 out. I came up in D'Antoni's system, and then I had the opportunity to run an offense in Northern Arizona where we manipulated that system and play predominantly all 5 out to start possessions, right? Basketball ultimately will finish 4 out, 1 in once you have a screener that rolls, but our alignments always started really 5 out. And then as my career progressed more to Charlotte, it became a little bit more of an emphasis on 4 out, 1 in, and it was foreign to me. It was a little bit different, and it was a great learning experience of being able to find that balance between both. But headed into this season, having more responsibility in the offensive end, watching these teams, Milwaukee, for example, like you saw a very interesting balance between both. And I think at times it's like we get too heavy 5 out or 4 out, 1 in, and that's our identity, as opposed to like, no, it's a balanced game. And what, as a project of mine personally, breaking down our flow possessions, like I said, you're playing pretty much 40 to 42 possessions of an NBA game out of flow. And if you break down and watch how possessions start, it's pretty much an even split between possession starting a 5 out versus 4 out, 1 in, just to start the possession. So for me, like teaching your rim run reads is, to me, day one of training camp. As a big, when you get a rebound, right, and you're outletting, naturally, you're probably going to be 5 out. Now, if you've got a guy like Kai Jones, who's an elite athlete, and he comes down with a board and his man is right next to him, it becomes a foot race at times. Like, that's your read. But if you're caught outside the paint at some point and you're not in any rebound position, you're probably running the rim, and then now you're starting in a 4 out, 1 in alignment. And from there, it's just knowing your triggers. But that's where the element of unpredictability comes in, because your 4 out and your 5 out triggers can be very similar. It's just different alignments. You can still play out of a drag in each situation. when you're essentially shorting it there, or you're immediately flowing into step-ups. It's really your world and what you want to do. My preference is if you're big as rim run, you're keeping them there for a second to let things develop. And then when the play breaks down, you're bringing them back up. That's a lot of what my mindset was. But it was interesting to break down our 20 best offensive games from a season ago and seeing like, wow, like we were a heavy 4-out-1 team. We put a heavy emphasis on that. But ultimately, we ended up playing essentially in an even split between 5-out and 4-out. So just accepting that balance and getting really good at playing in both is key.
And I want to come back to that a little bit, but I also want to talk about the dunker spot, because I can picture like obviously Cody Zeller before and Plumlee, like different guys like that play really well as playmakers out of the dunker spot as well. And when we talk about rim running, like we're not talking about traditional stay in the post. We're talking about then emptying to dunker spots. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. And then you got a lot of teams and coaches don't necessarily care where your big space is in terms of what dunker, whether it's ball side or opposite. I hear a lot of ball side dunker spacing just to open up slot drives. Me personally, I like strong side dunker spacing because it now opens more nail attacks, and we're looking to hit the nail and play from there to open up snap drives or slot drives in the opposite wing. And then now if like that guy doesn't have an avenue to drive it, maybe it's a two-man game with your four, in that trail wing spot, playing in a DHO, involving himself as a screener with an empty side. Right. So now you have the empty side. Okay. That small is now coming out the DHO. He's got nothing open there. Reverse it back to your one. And then now you're in a step up in a third side situation, but you're not like that deep into the clock where it's panic mode. You're probably playing with 13, 14 seconds on the clock, and you're still fluid. You're still grooving, and you're still in a position to now touch the paint with time left to go on the clock.
So I want to say it was Phoenix. I saw a team run actually a dribble handoff to the dunker spot, say from a stack out, high post entry, dribble handoff to the dunker spot. I just thought such creativity and different types of things, because as the game evolves, like we're seeing so many playmakers at every position. To be able to find a way to use them is part of the fun of it for you now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I really wish I could be reincarnated as a 5-man. It's such a fun position. It's such a fun position to coach and teach. When your fives really figure it out and understand that rim running or non-rim running and spacing in general is such a highly valued skill that, again, doesn't come up in the box score and is massively sacrificial and gets you paid. Again, that's a joy.
I'm sure, again, you might not know percentages, so I'm just throwing out a random question, but like this tradition maybe 25 years ago of hitting the rim runner in the flow in transition, it just seems to not happen anymore. And I got to say that's probably because transition defense is so good at accounting for that. But you're not seeing that very often, are you, hitting ahead to the rim runner?
Yeah, you don't see it in high volume. I think you see more of like the seal in transition in a rim run situation. A guy who does it well, he may leak out a little bit too much at times, but like a Montrezl Harrell where he's contesting on the perimeter and now he's rim running and sealing and throwing it in, like that's really tough to guard. And I don't know the points per possession on that per se off the top of my head. It's a good project for me, but like when you do hit seals, it's pretty high percentage in general in transition.
So that's a part of it as well, as thinking about cross matchups in transition, which is a place that you see that as well. If you see a cross matchup in transition, especially at the rim, is that immediately a flow in terms of trying to get the ball to that high low or playing off of that?
I think you got to teach your guys to be a threat for sure. Like if you're running the rim and you're not putting pressure on a small first is just to explore it. Like, I don't think you're necessarily taking advantage of that player's skill set all the way, but then there has to be the recognition of I can't clog. Like the minute I don't get it, I'm out. I'm clearing corners, I'm spacing, and then I'm relying on those guys to develop as playmakers. I think like we've done a good job with our 3s and 4s, like developing as handlers because we've allowed them to space and come off DHOs coming out of the corner. And I think overall, if like your program is about development, that style of basketball of like committing to playing 5 out and giving them freedom to space in the perimeter, it does help with overall versatility.
I know I get asked this a lot. I'm sure you do as well. When to rim run versus when to trail. Can you break that down for us a little bit deeper in terms of how you teach that?
I think the first and foremost aspect of it that I wouldn't say gets confusing, but we can do a better job as coaches clarifying is just your spacing after mates and flow. There's the mentality of Do you want just your 4s and 5s to inbound, or do you want just whoever's closest to the ball to inbound in order to play fast? But I think at times, whoever's closest can create a level of freneticism that you may not like. I'm perfectly fine with it, but it can throw off the balance of your floor, as opposed to like if you are a team that wants to play predominantly 5 out, your 5-man is in the paint, he's closest to the ball. Make it the mentality of like, if your 5-man is closest to us, take it out. And then now you're playing 5 out. Or is it the mentality of your 5-man isn't closest to it, so now it's whoever's, closest to the ball taking it out, and you're automatically in 4 out, 1 in spacing. So it's really just about the preference of what you like. Me personally, I'm a big fan of just 5-man. If you're closest to it, you're taking it out, because your 5s are so skilled these days that I don't think it's a turnover. It's turnover city if they're taking it out. They can run the baseline. They can. Now you got your smalls as high outlet positions, and you're naturally flowing into your 5 out triggers with little confusion. And
you were with Dan Antonio. Did that change a lot in his time, or did he stay true to closest player inbounding, or what was it?
Well, in RGV with Coach Matt Brazzi, we really had our 4s taking it out the majority of the time. And then you had your 5s like Chinano Onuaku just slow trailing into play, and we were just hooping out of that. But like you go to programs and that are more rim running based, I think the inbounding responsibility, while you don't want to overcomplicate it, of course, is definitely something that like is a small nuance that you have to address when you're implementing your offense.
Well, and I've seen that discussion quite a bit in terms of designating the exact lane and the exact spot a player runs actually helps them play freer, because they know exactly what their responsibility is. And then that obviously leads to this better spacing structure. Is that the case in the NBA, or is it a little bit more free?
No, I definitely think it's the case. And, if you're just like looking at our offense in retrospect, when we were at our best, our after make offense was highly, highly efficient. We were always in the green in the top 90th percentile when our after make efficiency was super high. There's a little bit of a difference that you have to make between transition offense after makes and flow offense after makes. When your flow offense is high level and you're able to flow into triggers freely without thinking too much, that's when your offense is at your best. So to be able to maximize our running habits and not overthinking about them is the number one goal, in my opinion, of how you want your guys to play.
For example, how does Second Spectrum define the difference between transition and flow in terms of that? I mean, a primary versus a secondary type of flow.
Well, I don't really know Second Spectrum's definition, but for us, it's always been the first 6 seconds of the shot clock is defined as transition.
Okay.
And so those are like when.
So it doesn't matter the number of passes or the action; it's just within this time frame.
No, and that's the interesting thing, is that you may be playing out a pistol per se, right, and still score in the first 6 seconds of the shot clock, but it's great organized early offense.
And that's why I ask it, because again, like it's maybe semantics, but it's a curiosity, because once you kind of flow into an action or you get multiple passes, some people might define that more as flow as opposed to primary. So I'm just curious.
Right. Yeah, and that's where we as coaches, you have your offensive coordinators. Shout out to Jay Triano, the legend himself, but he breaks down every possession after every game, and he's noting what our flow numbers versus transition numbers may be, and that's different than what at times is put together in our post-game reports. That their transition numbers may be different than what our transition numbers are, our flow numbers are, because of just what we're watching per se versus just the time on the clock.
Well, and what's more important is what you guys define it as, for sure. So I was just curious if there was more of a general definition, because I know that is a challenge in even looking at synergy numbers sometimes and not truly understanding what they define as transition versus not. So amazing stuff. Coach, I mean, I want to come back. I mean, you mentioned ego adjustment and role playing, or the value of role players. So I'm curious, because this is also the progression that you went through as a coach somewhat as well, to be able to become this great role player that you are as an NBA assistant. Can you talk a little bit about that process too?
Yeah. Everybody's personal growth and development revolves around the idea of truth. And if you can't accept the truth and you can't understand that correction is not criticism, you're going to have a very hard time of succeeding at the highest level of basketball, or the highest level of any industry that you're in. So as a young coach, having gotten into the G League at 824, working as a manager before that for Coach Larinaga, and before that as a Division III player, you come into these situations having to do the dirty work, right, that you never really expected. And so as a coach, you allow those teachings to kind of translate into how you handle your players and how you truth tell to your players. And for me, it's always been uncomfortable, right? Like growing into a coach that's not afraid to tell the truth is everything at this level. And when you have guys that accept it and understand that it's not criticism, that's when you truly begin to blossom and you see huge strides made in your players. So to be able to lead with the mindset of the truth is your salvation and standing by that and making that your moral backbone, I think is the number one thing in terms of helping guys like really fight that battle of adjusting their ego.
So I'm curious, have you had mentors in your life, through coaching that have given you that truth in terms of feedback to help you develop as a coach?
Oh yeah, 100%. And there've been times where it's killed me in a lot of ways, right? Like you walk away hurt. Of
course, you're human, coach. You're human.
But at the same time, it's for the ultimate betterment of you. And if you can really decipher that love and truth and know that where that truth is coming from is out of a place of love, then you're going to grow. Again, like I'm making it sound as if like, oh, you got to tell the truth and that's it. No, there's a neutrality behind it, right? It's a positive neutrality. For me, I live in the positive. Yeah, that's just how I operate. It's a game that I love. There are things far bigger than the game itself. And we're here and we have an unbelievable opportunity to make money and win playing this game that we love. So whenever I'm critical or telling the truth, it's coming from a place of genuinely just wanting to see you succeed. And if you live your life that way, things become a lot more stress-free. And you can really understand like, man, this really wasn't that hard to maybe space a corner or make the extra pass because that ball is going to find me if I do those things. That's just how the universe works.
Beautiful message, Coach. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for all you shared on this podcast. Just incredible insights.
I appreciate it, my man. I appreciate it.